you are from Calgary, and as a Calgary native, I'm wondering what you think the potential is of the city. Because Calgary has a young population, they've got a low cost of living, they got an economy heavily reliant on oil, and ideally that can change in the future. So the city has a lot of things going for it, in my opinion. But what do you think?
Well, I think it's gotten a lot better from when I lived there as a kid. So I was just back last week. Actually, was just super impressed with the energy, the growth of the city. It's a very like hyper livable city. The proximity to the mountains is phenomenal, and it does seem like there is a lot of entrepreneurial energy there. I mean, certainly companies like Neo. Well, I'm broadly very skeptical of neobanks as a sector, and I'm sort of I was an early investor in Nubank in Brazil. The firm I worked for before I started Bedrock back in 2015. So I thought there was a great neobanking opportunity, many, many years ago. I think today I'm much less bullish on neobanks, but certainly companies like Neo and others in Calgary are proving that there is sort of an emerging ecosystem. Yeah, I mean, when you think about sort of tech frontiers, there's always this sort of question, geographical frontiers. Always was, a lot of the frontiers of the past, 10 plus years have been kind of closed off in certain ways. And so there's a sense in which China was a frontier. There's a feeling I have now that it's not a frontier I want to be involved in any way. And it certainly is a lot less accessible for Western investors, I think, on a go forward basis. So that's kind of off as a frontier in my view. California was the tech frontier for a long time. I think I am probably still more bullish on California than anywhere else. And then I think a lot of the European stuff. I think the macro in Europe, unfortunately, is not particularly good over the next several years. So there is a dearth of geographical frontiers for startups. And but yeah, Calgary seems pretty good. I can't think of many better places to start a startup today.
Makes sense. Do you think that cities matter less given the advent of remote work and more people are after not necessarily a balance, but they like the fact that they have the freedom to be where they want to be? And perhaps that even contributes to a better output at work at the end of the day.
No, I don't agree with that. I think remote work is largely what we at Bedrock would sort of coin a narrative mirage. I think there are exceptions that prove this as a rule. So in our portfolio, a business like Vercel is highly remote, although several of their key executives are based in San Francisco. They have employees all over and they've managed to make it work. So there are examples where remote work can really work powerfully. But I think by and large, particularly as an entrepreneur building an early stage startup, there's an energy, there's a vibrancy, there's a collaboration that comes from being in a space together. And I think getting that city right or town or wherever where you're going to have your first, let's say, 10 team members live is really important. And I think in-person collaboration at the early days for startups is critical to building trust. And so I think remote work, pretty skeptical of it. And so I think cities still really matter. And then they have also decayed quite significantly through the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about your early days because you worked at P&G, I believe, in Cincinnati, Ohio originally, and then you relocated to the Bay Area and you networked like crazy. You got gigs at Clarium, you got gigs at Founders Funds. How did some of these conversations happen? And then I think what advice would you give to students looking to get their name out there in a good way, but they might fear being annoying or too pushy to some people?
I mean, look, the reality is I think if you ask any of my friends or colleagues today, they'd say that I loathe networking. So I'm like the least networking oriented person ever. Any excuse I can use to not go to a networking event or like avoid going to a conference, I will take it. So I do not like networking. Now, that said, when I was, much earlier on in my career, you sort of have to do it. If you grew up the way I did, I was the son of two public school teachers in Calgary, had no connections in the tech industry, no history in my family of entrepreneurship. Like you kind of have to figure out what your unique break is. For me, in the context of having come from P&G, the starting point was I networked my way within P&G as like a huge old school corporate, very highly corporate company. I networked my way out of Cincinnati into the Bay Area. So I got P&G to move me internally to the Bay Area. And then once I was there, I landed there at a moment in time where all of these early generation consumer internet companies like Facebook was, a few years old at the time. Slide was this new gaming application on Facebook founded by Max Levchin, who's one of the people I met in the Bay Area. They were all trying to crack brand advertising. They were all trying to figure out how to monetize through brand advertising. And I was a brand marketer at P&G. So yeah, I was like 22 or 23 years old, but I was on the brand management team at Tide, and I was able to offer insight into what like brand, and again, brands weren't advertising on social media at the time. This was not a thing that was happening. I was able to offer some of these tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley insight into what a brand manager at P&G or an advertising buyer at an ad agency would need to see in terms of metrics, performance data, etc., for brand advertising, what type of ad units these tech startups should consider. And that gave me a unique vector of value add that I could provide to a set of entrepreneurs and people in Silicon Valley in 2006, 2007, that helped me ultimately, break into the technology industry.
That's awesome. Okay, the next question that I had on the list, it was actually a very amazing quote that you said at the Web Summit.
Somewhere along the way to global domination, many of us in tech traded in the goal of a good life for an efficient life without even realizing it.
My question is, how do you personally monitor this stuff? Like, how do you know when you're leaning too much to one side versus the other? And then what are some tangible things that you focus on to ensure that you actually achieve the goals of a good life and still crush it in your job day to day?
Yeah, man, it's a constant struggle trying to get better at this stuff. It's much easier to deliver the line on the stage than it is to actually live a good life day to day. So I do want to give that as a disclaimer. It's much easier to actually talk about it. Look, I'd say that my high level intuition on it is the more one tries to measure it and quantify it, perhaps that moves you further away from actually living a good life. And so there is this, there is this sense in which the more measurable it is, the more tangible the examples you're able to give around this is why my life is good, or these are the things I'm doing to live a good life. Maybe perhaps the less good it is. And I'd say for me, what I really focus on are I look, every month or so, I try and reflect on the prior month and journal what have been the moments or the experiences or the things that happened in the past month where I felt content. I'm not a naturally super happy person, but I am a content person, and there's a difference between those two things. And I try and think about what are the moments or experiences where I felt content, and then just like try to have more of those the following month. Put myself in situations where I'm going to have more of those the following month. So that's sort of one random idea, but like I could give the standard list of like sleep optimization, diet, routine around exercise, etc. Like there's family, relationships, like there's all these things I could list, but ultimately I feel like it's highly person specific. And I think the more you measure it, you might actually move away from living an actually good life if you over measure.
So in 2020, when you were doing more remote work as opposed to now, when you have your new office, has anything changed in terms of your viewpoint on that stuff? Or was it kind of just, I know this isn't the way to do it, but I've got to slug it out for however long, and then we'll be back in person?
Well, look, I mean, I'm going to rewind back. So we were never remote until, we went remote in March of 2020, and we were remote for like roughly a year. And if I'm being totally honest, I'd say the biggest reason we were remote was I really wanted to use COVID as a wedge to get out of New York City. I was sick of living there, and I wanted to up my surfing game and live on Kauai. So my partner in life and I moved to Kauai for a year, and I surfed a lot, and I was actually highly productive. I'd say we made some of our best investments ever at Bedrock during that period, and I felt highly generative living on Kauai. But it turns out that it's just a little bit too far away to sort of continue to scale our firm. So we decided we need to centralize somewhere. And we had a debate internally as a team as to where is the city that we want to, have our next physical office. We still have a satellite presence in New York, but we are centralized here in Austin. We've been here for a year. We did recently open up our office, but we've been working in person together in Austin for basically a year. So we've been basically non-remote for quite some time. It's great. I mean, I love seeing my team members in person. The organic interactions and collaborations that you can have in person can't be replicated, I think, digitally today. So I'm a huge proponent of when you're a small organization having most of the people in one place. I do think the days of like everyone being in an office every day of the week all the time, I think those days are over. Our office is designed to be a space where we can hang out and chill, have debates, have conversations, host events, etc. And I think that's kind of like, you come into the office a few days a week, you travel, you sort of, but you have a central hub, I think is a good model for a firm like ours.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So jumping to Bedrock specifically, in your investor letter, you say, whenever an easily understood and easy to replicate new startup shows even a glimmer of promise, the hallucinations kick in. So again, similar to that last question, but how do you distance yourself from that?
Well, part of distancing yourself from it is not overly networking with other investors. So per our earlier conversation about networking, I spend very little of my time talking to other venture capital investors. I mean, that's maybe like less than 1% of my business time is talking with other VCs outside of Bedrock. I think the more you are trying to play this status game with other venture capitalists or other venture capital firms, the more groupthink inclined you're going to become. I'd say part two is really trying to assess these narratives on all of these layers. There's sort of the entrepreneur layer, there's the category layer, there's the product layer, there's the market layer, there's the societal layer, and you want to sort of deconstruct them on all these levels. So like one that we got very right here is being a narrative mirage, a hallucination. When we were first starting the firm, there were two crazes going on. One was the ICO craze, the initial coin offering craze in late 2017, early 2018. And we really identified ICOs as being a narrative mirage. And we did zero investments in ICOs, even though we have made investments in and around crypto. Number two was the scooter market, where this was at the time when all of these scooter sharing companies were the hottest things on Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley. Every VC firm was fighting over leading rounds in these companies. And through my early work as a Series B investor and board member at Lyft, we at Bedrock identified scooter sharing as a narrative mirage category, and we deployed $0 into it. Just today, I think there was a feature article in a newsletter about how the scooter category seems to not be working. We said that 4 years ago. And so I think the secret is looking at this, like you have to be sort of polymathic and unpack these narratives on companies and markets on all of these different layers.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. I am going to jump to some of your temp checks. There was one you released in December of 2020, and you said the following.
Silicon Valley is dead. It's gone because definitionally, what's basically happened is it's become all about the greed. It's become all about wealth accumulation. And what defined Silicon Valley historically was an overwhelming ethos around creation, around generative creation, building, technology. That ethos has been overpowered by greed.
Do you think this is kind of a cyclical thing where these areas will bounce back in due time?
Well, I think the best solution for greed is the one that we've got over the past several months with the macro meltdown. And I temp checked that viewpoint on Silicon Valley at a moment in time when markets were at all-time highs and everything was in a crazy nihilistic frenzy. I had this term nihilistic valuations I kept using about so many sectors and companies. That's changed. So we've had a insane correction in the markets, long overdue, frankly. And when the facts change, I change my mind. And so that is one of as much as I don't love stealing things from Peter Thiel, and I try and studiously avoid doing so. He did teach me the saying. I think it was Keynes's saying originally. When the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? And certainly the facts have changed. So at this point, I'm actually very I'd say on a relative basis, more bullish on Silicon Valley geographically, because I think a lot of the junk is going to be washed out of the system now. A lot of the in it just for chasing the financial upside without actually a passion for artistry, for creation, for technological innovation, that's getting washed out. And it's kind of a place for real builders again. So I have changed my mind on what I said in 2020, and I'm more bullish on Silicon Valley today than I've been in actually a long time geographically.
Got it. This is another side question, but it wasn't on the list. Is there anything you're passionate about that you don't get asked about a lot?
I have a huge passion for architecture. So when I was a kid, I became more popular, I think, as I grew older, but I was certainly, when I was very young, was not a popular kid in school. And I would spend a lot of my time on the weekends doing like complex architectural drawings in my bedroom at home in Calgary, Canada. And
Awesome.
I love architecture. It's a huge passion, totally decoupled from venture capital and tech, but something that I've always cared about.
All right. Well, the Calgary Public Library is like absolutely beautiful. I'm sure you've been there and you've seen it, but
There are a few that are beautiful there. Yeah, they've done a great job on a few of their buildings. Yes.
awesome. Okay. Next question on the list. We talked about being a Calgary native, what you think the potential is there. You were also on This Week in Startups, and you said no matter what's going on in the macro, you have to have agency in the micro. So again, kind of how do you ensure you're in control of that? But how has that changed over the years from when you started as like a principal at Founders Fund to now at Bedrock?
Well, I mean, look, part one of my advice. Let me just flip this around. It's right there on my wall. See, that says mute the world.
That's awesome.
Here in my office, and man, random impromptu thing there. But in any case, I listen to classical music and rap and hard rock, and don't really listen to podcasts, and I don't really track the news other than the financial markets that we're exposed to. I try and keep a good grasp of what's going on from a global macro standpoint, but just tuning out a lot of the noise and not letting the algorithms dictate what you pay attention to, I think, is the 80 for the 20 of having agency over the micro in your life. I'd say part two is surrounding yourself with people who are going to keep you honest and accountable. In terms of, are you being true to who you are? Are you leading with your vibe? Are you exerting agency over your, healthy agency over your behaviors? And then, I mean, look, like the reality is like whenever you build a firm and create a firm, as we've done here at Bedrock over the past almost 5 years now, you are creating your own universe. And so I've been really lucky in that, in us having founded this firm and created it, we have gotten to create a sort of mini world that I do have a lot of agency over because I created it.
You said that the biggest thing that's changed in your life over the years is your view of a higher power. First rapid fire question. Has there been any other big shifts?
I have to be much more disciplined in terms of my day to day, how I take care of myself. Like, I'm getting older, and taking care of, like, my diet has to be hyper dialed in. My workout routine has to be hyper dialed in. I have to know that I'm going to have really good time with people I love and people I care about on a very frequent basis, because my energy level has to be so high to do what we're trying to do at Bedrock. And, ultimately, you're the power plant for whatever organization you're running as a sort of entrepreneur. So my daily routine, I'd say, has gotten just much more dialed in. I'm much more focused on really taking care of myself in small ways every day, because in order to do my best work at Bedrock, I have to be doing that.
Right. So besides Hawaii, besides Austin, in one of your temp checks, you said all the coastal cities are basically. So where
most of them, I said most was the exact word. I think not all of them. A few aren't. Yeah.
Long story short, where do you like to visit? Where do you like to spend some time off?
I mean, I spent a ton of time in California. Obviously, the San Francisco Bay Area. We have several investments there. I love Southern California. I love spending time there. Love getting back to Canada. I love being in the mountains. I recently discovered New Mexico and think it's phenomenal. I love the old European cities. I think they're great places to visit. Japan is a favorite for me. I love Tokyo. I love traveling around the world. Yeah, there's lots of places that are great places to visit. Yeah.
That's cool. What is a company that you admire the most? Maybe you've invested in them, maybe you haven't.
I mean, honestly, it's got to be Rippling, which is one we have invested in because of the scale of their ambition. So it's an all-in-one solution for HR and IT. But the scale of their ambition is really to be the single source of truth for employee data. And the way in which that will unlock, we believe, over a 10, 20-year time horizon, so much value for companies and also, quite frankly, human flourishing for individuals through reducing administrative work in companies. It's just a massively scoped ambition. And something that Parker Conrad, the founder of the company, has done that is extremely unique. I don't think I've ever seen any other entrepreneur do this, is he's actually assembled a team of entrepreneurs. So there are like multiple proven founders that work at Rippling, and they are entrepreneurs within Rippling. They're leading their own startups within the company. They recently launched a suite of products around corporate spend management, which was built by an entrepreneur who joined Rippling to build that micro company within the company. So tons of admiration for that one.
Final question. What advice would you give to your younger self?
To be less hard on myself. I historically have been way too self-critical. It's sort of been my Achilles heel earlier on in my career was I was too hard on myself. I was too rough on myself. And that can lead to like unwarranted insecurity when you're early in your career. You don't want to be arrogant. You don't want to have a sense of entitlement. I've never had that, and I'm allergic to folks who have that. I want to keep those people as far away from me as possible. But the opposite failure mode was true for me, where I was sort of too insecure. I was too hard on myself, and I would tell myself to be gentle on myself.
Perfect. Okay, Geoff. This was an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it. This was really cool.
Really enjoyed it. My pleasure. Peace out. See you later.